I'm getting myself pumped up behind the scenes right now. We just did another episode, the episode that you can see probably in the playlist just down there, like underneath Templar over there. You can see in the episode playlist. We were just talking about the second trailer of Andor, and we hit end, and then we were like, all right, we're gonna record another one, and we got here, and right before it was like, all right, here we go. We're talking about one of the most interesting TV shows on the planet right now, a show that we have already given a 7 out of 10 for the first season, and that show, of course, is Severance. We're going to be doing our Severance Season 2 speed run. That's a lot of S's. I'm going to have to really play with the EQ on this editing of this episode to make sure you don't get a lot of we're going to be doing a speed run, and because we're like definitely behind on all of the episodes, and so we're going to kind of catch us up. We're going to talk about some interesting things that have happened in big chunks of episodes, and then hopefully we'll be caught up by the time episodes are live, and then the season will be over, because why not? So Templar, what episodes are we doing this episode, or this episode of the Roundtable? We are talking about episodes 1, 2, and 3, correct?
Indeed, yeah. 1,
2, and 3. So I'm going to pull up and again, I commented on this before, this is probably my favorite screen grab of Mark Scout ever. If you are watching this on YouTube, it is the sort of constipated, angry at Miss Cobel, like ready to kill somebody, but mostly constipated face of Mr. Mark Scout. And I love it, and I can't get enough of it. And we're just going to hit play because I want this in the background here. Also, there's a lot of interesting stuff that's going to be happening over there. If you are ever interested in doing some of these deep dives, like way deeper than we're ever going to go, Think Story they do some really, really cool stuff. I think it's just one dude just sitting in his basement. He does some really cool stuff, not just with Severance, with like all sorts of TV shows. And some of the shows have been out for a while. He really breaks them down. He does some really cool essays and things like that. So feel free to do that. But we're launching through episodes 1, 2, and 3. And so I guess the best place to start is, let's just kind of give like a quick summary here. Do you want to summarize episode 1? I'll grab 2 and you grab 3, or do you want to kind of reverse it here? What works better for you? We're going to live produce this.
Sure. Yeah, we can do it. So episode 1, we get Mark comes back in after the end of season 1, where they had done the overtime contingency, where Dylan had stayed behind because he had already had a little time outside, and then everyone had their sort of excursions. Mark was at the party with his sister, and he realized that Miss Cobel was there. We had Helly realize that she was Helena Egan at a fundraiser get-together, or promoting Severance, meeting with a senator, and she was supposed to be speaking there. And then Irving was sort of investigating his home, realizing that he was sort of already spying on Lumen, that he kind of had some sort of mission that he was on there, and then he ends up going to see
Bert
G. So anyway, so that was the end of season 1. So into season 2, episode 1, Mark comes back. He realizes, he gets back there, he's all worked up. He realizes Cobel was there. And then he also is faced with having 3 new members of his team. So his teammates are gone. They've all left. He's told that they basically decided not to come back, and he insisted on coming back. So he's there on his own. He doesn't want them. He wants his people back to continue largely what they had started. He pursues a very unfortunate attempt of getting them removed.
Yes, he does.
By
a note.
Writing a note and putting it in someone's pocket and then leaving. But he didn't, change his handwriting, didn't do anything. So it's immediately uncovered that, he was trying to get rid of them, which I thought was funny, because I thought that was going to become a whole thing, that like there would be some big effort on Mark's part that he would end up getting rid of them and then get back. And it's like, no, he tries and then immediately fails, immediately gets called out. So then he just ends up running to the office, contacting the board and sort of basically demanding that they be returned, or sort of asking the board that they be returned. And I believe that is the end of season 1 or episode 1.
Yeah. Let's stop there. I want to point out 2 quick things that are extremely interesting in this episode. Number 1, Miss Wong, who is this sort of like 12-year-old. I don't know what she is. I don't know if she's severed.
She's a child.
Yeah. Oh, she's a kid. Oh, but I don't know if she's like a severed child. I don't know if she's like, there's some weird beef between her and Mr. Milchek, and then she acts like an adult, but then she pulls out this like toy with Kier trying to like float a ring up over Kier's hands. So there's that. But the second thing is, in this episode, they have Mr. Milchek lies to them, shows them a newspaper with obviously an obviously photoshopped picture of them. Like, I mean, it's terrible. Trying to get Mark to believe it. And so he's like, hey, you guys caused the Innie uprising, yada, yada, yada. And then they go in, they have this sort of like, this stop motion video voiced by none other than Keanu freaking Reeves, which I thought was just the funniest thing. And it personalizes them. It tells them all about how Lumen is going to take care of the Innies now. Like, there's a video. You can watch it right there. There's Bert like saying, we're going to burn this place to the ground. It has like actual like voice footage from them, which means that Lumen was spying on them. All of these other things. But Keanu Reeves is the voice of that. It's fascinating to me. What stuck out to you in this episode?
Yeah, I mean, well, the lying to them about them that they caused some big changes to happen, when we learn later that it didn't really cause anything. It all kind of got buried. Yeah. You know, Helena's like speech got passed off as she was drinking or something, and they had basically clamped down on the footage and all that anyway.
Oh, and the night gardener.
The night, right? Because she comes back and lies about where she was, or what happened, and Irving immediately knows that she's lying.
Yeah.
So yeah, the video is funny, like the new break room that's like more chill, I guess. The sort of attempt at making Lumen seem sort of friendlier, like they're doing something, playing into kind of every corporate, like, we've changed our ways, we understand, we're listening. Like, all of that stuff is just, it's so kind of pitch perfect to the just like corporate dystopia that they don't care about you but are pretending to care. It's very well done. Yeah. I also inside of that as well, there's a weird time thing. Like, I think Milchek says it's been like 4 or 5 months. I think he says it's been 5 months since you've been back, but then later on you learn it's only been like 3 days, maybe 4 days, which is like, wait, why would he lie to him about this and all of those other things? And then when he finally comes back and meets Mark W., and then who's the old guy, him right there, Mark W., and then the Italian guy, and then the girl from Arrested Development, it's very funny because that Italian guy, was his name Dario Grimaldi? The Italian guy is... You hear that he is from somewhere else in the world. And one of the things that I think is interesting about this entire Severance world is that there are allusions to the fact that this is not actually planet Earth. Or if it is, that it's an alternate universe or something like that. In our world, and I talked about this, I think, in season 1, but in our world, we have 178 countries total. In this world, according to even the newspaper here, they have 206 countries. They're also located in a state that is a comma PE. So it's capital P, capital E, which we don't know where that is. And so I think it's interesting that this guy comes from some place in parts unknown. It could be Italy. It could be somewhere else. He says it's Italy, but like, is Italy actually where Italy? I don't know. I just think all that's interesting. And then also Mr. Milchek, there's the obviously photoshopped thing. Like, it's them standing in a car. It's just the funniest, like the funniest thing with all this like redacted information. And funnily enough, this picture is actually when JFK won
the presidency. This is from his ticker tape parade. Very, very good.
That's
very good. Yeah, very good. What else stuck out to you
from episode 1? I mean,
episode 1 felt...
I don't know if anything else stuck out about episode 1, really. Asked more questions. The kind of shift that things are supposedly going to be better. Miss Wong is kind of interesting to know what's going on there. We'll get into it because a little bit later, there's some conversations that she has with Milchek that sort of sheds a little bit of light on something we don't totally understand, but part of like some explanation of why she's there. So it's not a bad kind of start to things. It's an interesting kind of I think it was an effective start to season 2 to like raise some more questions, address some things, and kind of also sweep everything under the rug that we thought was going to be maybe a big deal at the end of season 1, that they're going to make some big difference. And then, no, not really. Like, it all kind of got buried, and that was it.
Yep. Well, let's move to episode 2 then. So episode 2 is less about Lumen and more about things that are happening in the outside world, which is a really cool perspective, because you don't really see that ever in episode 1 outside of just season 1, outside of the sort of locales of Mark or even a party with everybody. Like, you don't really see the outside world. And so in the outside world here, let me pull up the episode here and we can just fire up the old loop.
Because episode 1 is basically all at Lumen. And then episode 2 is, I think, all filling in the gaps of what happened outside, right?
Yeah.
So
and so you see an right here, like you see at the very beginning of the episode, it's like Mark's when they go from the overtime contingency back into his real thing. You see the shrinking while he's at, or the Zolly thing when he's at the party. You then see all of the stuff happening with Dylan trying to get a job, being discriminated against when he goes to get a job because
at the door business,
company. When he finds out that he's a Lumen, like I thought that was very, very funny. So Mark then discovers or gets told that his wife Gemma is still alive, and that's like the big sort of like mind explosion thing for him, right? And then you start to wonder, okay, so why is Miss Casey, like, why is she being hidden at Lumen? And so there's all of these like things happening. And then if you actually watch the episode with kind of your fine-tooth comb on just a little bit, you can see that there's all these little hints about who Helly actually is. And we'll get into who Helly is in a later episode, but who Helly actually is in the Severed world. And then kind of the facade that she is leading, all sorts of other things right there. And then there's also kind of this new character structure thing that happens where you see some stuff with Miss Cobel. You kind of, I don't know, this episode 1 and episode 2 really felt like back in the day when you'd get the beginning of seasons of TV. You'd have like your prestige drama, like Lost or whatever, with Sons of Anarchy or Sopranos or whatever, Breaking Bad, and a season would end, and then immediately coming out of the season, you get a 2-hour chunk. And that 2-hour chunk, it really feels like this was a cohesive unit. Like this was a cohesive 2 hours that really fit together, that when you watch them in tandem, again, because I binged them, I knew 1 and 2 were out, so I binged them back to back. It almost felt like, why are we even rolling credits in between this? Like, let's just keep it going, because it felt like it had the same weight and same feeling and same, I don't know, all that other feeling. And it really starts, at least for me, starts to talk about identity, because then it goes to Mrs. Selvig at Miss Cobel, and you see her kind of driving away and freaking out and doing the whole thing, and like, who is she? And then she just kind of disappears. Like, you just don't see her for a while, and that's really kind of how the episode ends. I mean, I don't know. I like I said, I really feel like everything should have been together. So I don't know. What are your thoughts on episode 2 here? Anything stick out to you?
Well, I mean, we get some information on kind of what the lies were from episode 1, because it's not that Mark wanted to stay, like he kind of had to be convinced to go back. This is the first time I built
with the pineapple basket.
And then he also brings them to Dylan and Irving after, because once Mark convinces them to hire him back, basically, which they only do, and this is, I think, the first mention we get of the Cold Harbor file.
Yes,
that they really need him to finish this Cold Harbor file.
Yeah, he's at 86% on the Cold Harbor or whatever it is.
Right, and that's a running theme throughout the season, that they're tracking how far he is on this Cold Harbor file, and it's of extreme importance that seemingly Mark himself finishes this file, that he needs to be the one to finish it. So they really go out of their way to sort of accommodate him. So that's why they agree to bring Dylan back, to bring Irving back, and they basically force Helena to go back there. So he'll have his team back, so he'll be happy, so he'll do his work, so he'll get this file done that they really want done. Right. So we don't as of yet know why that's important that happens, but we know it's important, and that they were kind of desperate for it to happen for some reason. We also get Cobel getting offered her job back, right?
Yep.
Basically, Cobel gets offered her job back, which you'd think that she would have been interested in, but she seems kind of insulted by it. And then we'll get to it in season 3. There's kind of a continuation of that. There's some more issues there. I think those are the main things that stood out to me. The Cold Harbor file, the kind of look at the sort of lies that happened outside, that Mark wants to quit, and which his sister is surprised about, because, you know, it sounds like he just wants to be done. And initially he doesn't really seem to believe that Gemma is alive, and it's sort of Devin trying to convince him that, like, no, like, she actually, like, it seems like she is, and like trying to actually kind of push him back to it. So yeah, I think those are the main things that stood out to me.
The big thing, and I didn't realize this until I had watched actually this episode from Think Story. So the Cold Harbor thing is fascinating because, and maybe it's not in this episode, at the very beginning, so in the title sequence of this, I think it is here actually, Cold Harbor, in the title sequence. It's a different title sequence. It's more like stop animation, maybe claymation, whatever, you know, figures. You see Mark standing on like a ice floe in the middle of a pond. And then you look over and you see a car in the water. And the theory, nobody really has said, we know that Gemma got in a car crash and that she died and that Mark had to identify her. That's all we really know. We don't know anything else about it. Later we kind of find out a little bit more, but the theory coming from this is twofold. Number one, the reason that Miss Casey is still alive is that they're trying to like clone her, or they saved her, or something along those lines. They're trying to do something there. Lumen is trying to do something there with like genetic processing or something. And number two, the macro data refinement is all based around Mark's feeling towards Gemma, towards his wife. And so if you think back to season 1, when Helly actually asks, like, what are you doing? Like, and he's like training her on how to actually do this refinement. He says, you look at the numbers and they make you feel a certain way. And what the theory is that Cold Harbor is actually Mark trying to sequence or genetically modify his feelings towards his own wife. And they call it Cold Harbor as a code word because she crashed into theoretically she crashed into the harbor, which is why it is linked to the title scene. I don't know. I find that type of theory, it's like, oh, that makes a heck of a lot of sense. Actually, that makes a whole heck of a lot of sense. And then the other fascinating thing here is the sort of like, is this where we meet Bert? Yeah. So Bert kind of shows where we know Irv is like calling somebody, right? Like he's like going to the payphone and calling somebody. We don't know who he's calling. He's talking to somebody. It could be anybody, talking about certain things at Lumen, like some of the things he's trying to remember. We see all those black the paintings of that black hallway, which we see Miss Casey getting into that hallway, you know, all sorts of stuff. But the interesting thing is that Irving, from the get-go, has like a spur up his butt. He used to be, in season 1, he was like Mr. Company Man, and now he is not. He is like Mr. Revolutionary. And I think that's an interesting turn that that I don't know how we get to. And also something that I just noticed there, the person that Bert is with is not the same guy in season 2. Huh. Maybe they just needed to get a different actor. Or maybe it is an actual different thing. I don't know. But the actor that they got in season 2 is what's-his-face from Lord of the Rings. So, anyway, all that to say, anything else from episode 2?
Oh, yeah, it's Denethor from Lord of the Rings.
Yes,
that's
Lord,
right.
Lord Denethor with the tomatoes and the chicken.
Right. It's a very normal way of eating. No, I think that's good for episode 2, yeah.
All right, speedrun. Let's speedrun episode 3. Here we go. This is the Who is Alive one, and this one is freaking fascinating.
Yes. So this is where they find the goat. Is this where they find the goats?
Yes, this is the goat one.
Right. So they're going through, they have the posters for Miss Casey that they're looking for. They find the mammalians, right? The mammalians nurturable department.
Yes.
Which is like basically just some people taking care of goats. But there's also some people in like, because before we had seen the goats in season 1, but it's just like one room with a guy and some goats.
Yeah.
And then this
now
one, they go through
it's a meadow.
Yeah, they go through the tunnel into a meadow, and there's like people in like, I don't know, sort of vaguely demonic looking like black goat costumes and like all sorts of different stuff. It's like something out of like Midsummer or like, I don't know, something like that maybe.
Yeah.
That looks kind of nice on the surface, but they turn kind of hostile very quickly. So then Irving goes to O&D and gives the poster to Felicia. Again, they're looking for Miss Casey. And she identifies the hallway that he keeps drawing. So when he woke up in his apartment, there was all of all of his paintings were just these black paintings of a hallway with like a red arrow at it, and he didn't know what it was. And then this is where we find out that that's the elevator to the exports hall, which we'll see more of later in this season. And that Felicia says that they send a lot of things down there, basically, that a lot of the stuff they make goes to the exports hall. And then also one thing we haven't touched on that pops up in episode 1 and 2 is this visitation room that Dylan has.
Right.
That Milacek in episode 1 offers Dylan this chance for this visitation room, but he basically makes it seem like it's only for people who are married, so you're the only one who will actually be able to use it.
Right.
So it kind of is this thing that Dylan's hiding from the others, and kind of, you know, like that maybe Milacek is trying to use to sort of break them up or like sort of break them apart, seems like. And so we get a visit here with the he gets a visit with his wife, or his Audi's wife, and we get an interesting dynamic there where it seems like she's more interested in him than in his Audi, because basically through their conversation it makes it seem like his Audi is kind of lazy and doesn't like jerk. Seems like he does. Yeah, he's kind of a jerk. He doesn't really do a whole lot. He's not particularly motivated. And so she seems like she's more interested in him than in his Audi, which is a very strange dynamic. My wife and I were talking about that when we watched it, of like, he's like kind of cheating, but it's like sort of the same. It's like the same person, but it's like not really the same person, but like it's such a strange dynamic going on there. But so we get the visitation there. And then also this is when this episode, Natalie goes to Rickon to get him to rewrite a version of his book, essentially as propaganda for the innies, because they've seen how this book, which is like terrible, but the innies have like latched onto these like very, very basic concepts because of they're not aware of so many things, that the like very, very basic kind of hacky like self-help book that Rickon wrote is like so profound to them. And so they approach him because they want him to basically make a propaganda version of the book to kind of encourage the behavior that Lumen wants the innies to have.
Yep.
And then this is where we get the follow-up. So Cobel meets, well, this scene right here, meets with Helena, gets offered the job back, but then she offers to go have a meeting with the board. And then at that point she leaves. So I don't know if she thinks that they're going to do something to her or like, you know, what her, but she kind of here like leaves at this point. Even though they do kind of offer her position back, which is what she wanted, is to be the floor manager. And then Mark is trying to burn an image into his retinas to send a message to himself when to go back down to the innie. So basically, so that when he opens his eyes as the innie, there'll be a message burned on his retinas. So he's just staring into like a work light, one of those big work lights in his car, trying to do this. And so this is when Ragabi shows up again,
right?
And basically, she tells him like that won't work. Like it cycles, like basically to dilate your eyes, like whatever. Like they've thought of that, it won't work. And that reintegration is the only way. And then this is where she confirms that Gemma's still alive.
Right.
And then we get the first look at what the procedure of reintegration looks like, which my impression of it previously had been that it was from Petey, that it was maybe like basically that they kind of were able to turn off the like chip or like reprogram it, but it seems like it's much more subtle in sort of trying to like basically kind of like realign the kind of two parts of the brain that were sort of separated and severed. You kind of realign the sort of wavelength of them.
Right.
So we get that happening, and then that's the end of episode 3.
Yeah, there's something interesting there. So episode 3 was the one that I'm not gonna, like, episode 1 and 2 were great, don't get me wrong. Episode 3 was the one I was like, okay, I'm hooked. Like, it was the hook for me. It really was. And you're nodding, so I think you kind of agree with that. Like, I think that was the general consensus of, all right, this is worth getting into. Which later we're going to talk about episode 4, and it totally messes with your conceptions about everything that this show is doing. But the Who Was Alive thing was hilarious to me, and yet the idea of reintegration, we only saw Petey get reintegrated, and then he essentially died from a brain hemorrhage. We're assuming that's what happened with the nosebleeds and all sorts of stuff. So there's that, but also the goats thing. I don't know if it's going to come back. I don't know if it was just an aside. Like, I don't know what happened with the goats thing, but there's an interesting theory that they started the clone. So if we're thinking of Cold Harbor and everything as they're trying to clone people or they're trying to bring people back, yada, 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 that they started with cloning goats. And that's why there's all these goats. And that's why it's like mammalians nurturable, all that. And they're using all the DNA things that they learned there to implant into humans or to like figure out the whole procedure. I don't know. I also do think it's fascinating that Gwendolyn Christie is the head. Like, she was a perfect cast for this. She is, I don't know, in real life, she's terrifyingly tall. She's like 6'2", 6'3". She's brilliant in Game of Thrones. She's brilliant in everything I've ever seen her. She's also a voice on Civ 7, which I think is just, anytime you get a new tech or a new era in Civ 7, you've got Gwendolyn Christie talking to you, which is just so great. But she's like incredibly menacing, and yet she like breaks at the drop of a hat. And I think there's something there. I don't know if they're gonna get to it at the end of the season, but the way that she's menacing to all of a sudden being part of the revolution, I want to hear more about that story. I want to hear like what happened to them. Like, I want to hear why it looks like these people are cannibals or like tribal warriors, and why they like. How do you go to work from 9 to 5 looking like a cannibal and then just go up the elevator and you're fine? Like, I don't know. That's fascinating to me. What stood out to you in this episode? There she is.
Yeah, well, I think it's just a continuation in some way of what we've talked about before when we talked about season 1, was the idea that, I mean, if this is all you know, then your worldview is going to be pretty warped. And again, we saw this idea that people have this very negative impression of macro data refinement, right? Because at one point, someone asks her if they have pouches, they ask him to show their stomach, right? So it's again this continuation of...
I forgot about that.
It's the continuation of what we had seen with Bert and O&D of
everyone else is a monster.
This belief that like MDR is like, they're monsters, or like they're like they like carry the young in their pouches, and like that, all these kind of crazy beliefs. So we see some of that. And I guess like if this is all you knew, I don't know, I guess you're very committed to it, and they all have their roles to play. And again, what the purpose is, I don't know. Like the idea that it's based on some sort of cloning thing, like this is an alternate universe, like Dolly the sheep situation, like is kind of interesting. But
there's the pouches.
Show their stomach. So it was a weird episode, but it was a good one. I liked episode 3 a lot, actually. I think it brought a lot of things together.
So the one thing that is going to keep returning is Ragabi. She will continue to return. The reintegration, when we do talk about episode 4, it starts and then it's not talked about. And I want to know why that is. I think there's a couple of good reasons, because if the reintegration is an actual thing, like it takes over a person. Supposedly, like you're trying to line up brain waves, and there's a whole thing that's happening there. And so I don't know. I think there's something interesting there. I think the last little bit of like, I don't know, man, like weirdness is Cobel. You see Cobel at the very beginning of the episode waking up outside of Salt Neck, wherever the heck that is, and she's got a breathing tube, and they never really explain the breathing tube. It's got a date on it from like 1944, and they don't explain it. And there's a couple of theories floating around out there that I actually ascribe to one of them, that Cobel is either a bastard daughter of Kier Egan, or one of the Egans, or he or she is like a step sister or something like that, and she is trying to claim that she has a rightful claim to the Egan throne, or the rightful Kier throne, but she can't get past it. And so the thought is, like, when they invite her back into the board, they're going to kill her. At least that's the theory. She thinks they're going to try to like snuff out that danger, and so that's why she's like no, and then she runs away. So I don't know. That's fascinating. Cobel has to come back. Like she's got a story that's intimately tied with all of this, and I feel like whatever happens with Helly is going to have, like, Cobel's going to have to do something or be part of that. At least that's me. Also, there's a thought that Cobel is severed, which I think is also interesting to like explore. I don't know how it would work, but I think that's something fascinating to explore. And then the freaking goat department, dude. I don't know. I can just go on about the goat department forever. What else? What else are we missing here in season 3 or episode 3?
I think that's it. I think that's all I got for the first 3 episodes. Yeah. There's
a lot. And I think this is where Severance really shines. So I think you initially had talked about it like being like an off-the-wall comedy. And I think when it hides some of the comedic things, like goats, or like those really terrible lost and found paintings of Gemma, which is just like, that is just like the most ridiculous thing in the world. When it hides that weird sort of like menacing humor inside of a show, I think it's fascinating. The thought of like adultery as well is interesting in this. It's kind of a minor storyline, but like with Like, is it actually cheating on your wife if you are the same person but have a different brain? I don't know. And like, what does that mean in terms of ethics for everything else? So I don't know. There's a lot there. There's a lot we could like dive into. I'm looking forward to talking about episodes 4, 5, and 6 because like, boy, when things get when they turn hard in this show, and episode 4 turns hard, and it's unlike any episode of TV I've watched ever, or streaming or whatever. And yeah. So anything else before we wrap up this here episode on our not so speed run of Severance season 2?
No, I think I'm good.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for this episode. We'll be back talking about episodes 4 through 6, and then we will be caught up almost with live, and then we will talk about live Severance. But until then, we love you. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.